And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Howdie Mickoski, philosopher, historian, and reality explorer. Today we're going to be talking about his new book, Empty the Cave, Awaken the Spark. Howdie, welcome back. It's great to have you again.
Thanks, Jeff. We've been about 2 years, and so it's time for another talk. And interestingly, you get to be the first interview on the new book.
Oh, awesome. I didn't even know that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, my previous interview with Howdie was about how reincarnation is a trap. And it's my understanding that your new book is not only about exiting the matrix, but also exiting yourself. So can you expand on that for us?
The book, you might say it's the next step in the series. But this series is actually, there was 2 books prior to this. One was Exit the Cave, which was presenting this idea of a reincarnation soul trap, and that the world is not a loving, wonderful place at its deepest construction. But it also links with the book I did 4 or 5 years before that called Falling for Truth, which was the story of my 8-year test of reality, the results that came from that test, and eventually my falling into a canyon to realize that I was as much of an illusion as the world that I had been studying. And now this book is bringing both of those 2 areas together, because I feel that, because we can get into that, what I feel exiting the matrix means. And there's 2 sides of a coin that kind of have to be seen and brought together in order for that to happen. And usually you only hear someone talk about one side, and I felt this book needed to bring both together.
Since your book is titled Empty the Cave, is that saying basically that this is kind of based on Plato's cave?
Well, I titled the book with the first book in the series, because that was originally where people wanted me to go after I was known as the expositions guy for a long time, right? I wrote that book on the world fairs and dug into the questions of history. But my background, having spent all that time with a Korean monk and several native medicine men, was about reality and the testing of where we are and who we are. And I began to talk more about Plato's cave, the story of it, and using it as an illusion. I thought that would be great as a new series and a new book. But once I began studying Plato's cave and rereading the story, I realized it's actually a terrible analogy. It's presented as like the greatest story of ancient world about our world, and it's just full of holes. There was just all the things that you would want to see in it weren't in it. So I began to use now the words cave and matrix interchangeably to relate to a giant world of perception that we experience, which includes not just the material realm, but includes the astral realm, the etheric realm, whatever realm you can think of. It's all part of one gigantic universe. And I guess I should mention before we begin, like I always like to start interviews, that everything I'm going to say here is it's my opinion. It's just I'm sharing my 30 years of research and experiences, and I don't expect anyone to necessarily believe anything I say just because I'm saying it, right? I'm just a guy who's done some work and wrote some books, but it's also good not to discount it instantaneously either. I just share this material now for others to contemplate and think for themselves and come up with their own answers. So I just like to make sure that I say that at the beginning of my talks.
Since the last time you were on as a guest, my channel has more than doubled. So there may be a lot of new people here who don't know who you are and not exposed to your work. So can you briefly give us your list of reasons why we live in a matrix?
Well, that is mostly, it's a combination of personal experiences and reading of ancient texts. So I began this work 30 years ago in the midst of a Great Depression and coming out of a lot of traumas, and had some experiences coming out of that, and the opportunity to meet, like I say, some really, really good teachers when I was still living in Canada. And one of the main elements that they wanted me to do was to be testing the solidity of reality. So I spent 8 years doing exercises to see how solid the world was. So in those 8 years, I found out that the world was literally transparent. It was literally, it's only solid because we think it's solid. And that so that was a long time ago. That began the first set of breakdowns into questioning, well, what are we experiencing? Because it got to the point, Jeff, where I had to hold on to chairs when I sat down because I wasn't sure the chair was going to be there when I sat on it. That's to the extent of how transparent reality became. And this was, for anyone who asked, I never touched drugs in the course of this work. This was all done via, we'll call it exercises of awareness and exercises of work. But the second half of that work was defining who you are, actually, actually sitting and wanting to know who and what you are and doing work on, we'll call it self-definition find out, to find that answer, to believe that there's an answer possible and that you will find it. While that's going on, it becomes very clear that it's a world of suffering and that the world is, people are in constant trauma. A few aren't. A few sort of skate by this. And that was the beginning of this, was the recognition of wherever I turned in my life, I was dealing with somebody with another trauma, somebody with suffering. And some of the suffering people go through is horrible. My traumas were difficult. Mine were nothing compared to some of the people's I've had to hear about in the course of my journey. And it just started to become quite obvious based on, again, what ancient texts are presenting from the years I spent studying them, what my teachers were sharing with me privately, that this is not a world made by a loving God that cares about us. It's a world made that's designed. And originally, I called this a suffering pit of hell in the last book. That's how I described reality. But I'm softening that a little bit, only to call it now a giant pit of distortion, of which suffering is a major part of that. But by calling it a pit of distortion, it opens to let people know the unbelievable amount of layers of lies and distortion we've all been forced to live under, and forced to believe. That's the best way to call it. And really, that's what the work is. The work is just removing distortion. It's looking for lies, looking for false, acknowledging that they're false, and then dropping it and going for the next bit. That's kind of the journey. It's a backward story. So I'm sorry I didn't really answer your question, because such an answer would require hours of time together of explaining exactly how I came to that conclusion. But I did finally, in about 2022, I tried really, really hard to hold on that maybe there's something good here. Maybe there's something, maybe there really is a school here. And finally, I was able to let the last vestiges of hope go and say, no, this is this is a this is just a hole, and our job is just get out of the hole.
You mentioned that people are forcing us to be here. Is it possible they're forcing us, but they will let us go when we evolve spiritually and or mentally to get ourselves out?
No, because there's the other half of the problem. So we have the soul trap side, the side we've kind of just been talking about. And for anyone who doesn't know about this topic, you could watch the last interview that we did and you get a pretty good overview of where I was 2 years ago. But the other side of this that has to be brought in is the realization of emptiness. So what would be classified in Buddhism as the realization of emptiness, or other traditions as the finding of stillness, or in a sense, the realization of non-existence, the realization that this is not actually a reality. And that's the big trick that's going on here. It's that something can be contained, something can be trapped. What can contain emptiness? What can trap no thing? And that's at the core where one of the great distortions is starting to happen, is that emptiness is being told to believe that it's something. And it's bizarre because both sides of this coin have to be seen. A great Advaita or Zen master who understands emptiness but doesn't think there's any kind of trap in place will probably still get tricked. They'll die and they'll be fooled in the afterlife by whatever afterlife tricks this realm is going to play on them. If someone sees through the realm as a matrix and sees through it as a soul trap, but is holding on to their identity as being who and what they are, as being real, they're going to get trapped. They're going to get trapped on that side by something being offered that their identity really wants. So it becomes a two-sided coin of work that seem complete opposites. They seem to be the complete opposite of each other. And that's where I was challenged for over a decade because I got both realizations very quickly about 20 years ago, and I felt black and white thinking, only one of them must be true. Both both opposites can't be true. Black and white both can't be true. And I fought for a decade to try to figure out which one it was. And then finally, as Exit the Cave began to get started, I was starting to realize both are true. There's the trick. Both sides are true. And you have to learn how to become between them. Actually, even more than being between them, you learn how to bring the two together into a midpoint so that, in a sense, they live and they die at the same time. The opposites exist and don't exist. And that's how you start moving through the matrix.
Many of my near-death experiencers go to somewhere that we call the black void, a black space of emptiness. And some of my guests talk about if you want to exit the matrix, when you die, you want to go to that space. Can you comment on that for us?
That's one of the great gifts that people like yourself are sharing now, is that so many of the channels are sharing near-death experiences, and they're really, really important for people to be able to hear and dig through. It's not that I think more people are having near-death experiences than, say, they did 200 years ago. It's just there's a platform now where the people aren't seen as crazy and they don't have to fit them into some sort of religious box. They can share their experience. So because of that, there's this plethora of information that we can look through. As we talked about, there's usually one normal near-death experience that people get: the white light, Jesus and dead grandma, the life review, the feelings of love. That's the one side. But then you get these others. And like you mentioned, one is this place of the void, this place of, and everyone will describe it different, but that is emptiness, right? That is the experience of emptiness. The the shift comes when the realization is that, and this is where the realization happens, as opposed to the experience of the void, as opposed to the realization of the void. At least, again, I can only share the way it was experienced by this thing here, is when it stopped being I was experiencing the void or I was experiencing emptiness, and it's just emptiness. All that exists is emptiness, not an individual I experiencing it. That's when the big shift begins to happen. So to me, I say emptiness is not specifically the doorway to exit the matrix, but it is the doormat that what you truly are, what the Gnostics would call your divine spark for terminology. Emptiness is where you wipe your dirty feet on before you exit. So it's an important place. So you just said that's kind of how you exit, and that is, I would say that's correct. In Dzogchen Buddhism, for example, Dzogchen, their entire tradition is attempting to sit in what they call the clear light being this void space, with the idea being that if you get so used to it now that it becomes second nature to you while you're alive, as soon as you die, your instantaneous choice will be, I'm going to the clear light. I'll go to the void instantaneously. And there, like I said, you're literally at the doormat of the door. It requires this little extra boost to finish the job.
Are you saying that not only is reality nothing, emptiness, but we are basically nothing as well, except awareness?
That would be a good way of putting it, yes. The reason emptiness tends to be frightening for people. And it's if you read someone like St. John of the Cross, who wrote the famous text on the dark night of the soul in extreme detail. The dark night of the soul is really the dark night of the ego. And it's the ego, the identity self, coming face to face with the recognition of, I don't exist. I've been a projection in a projected realm my whole time. But that's only half of the experience. If you have, that's the scary side of the experience, right? And that's often many people have gotten really close to this, like more than you'd think. And they get to this point and the fear snaps them back. I'm going to lose myself. They don't recognize that on the other side of that comes the revelation of the totality of what you are. Which you say, it's awareness is a word, but that doesn't even really describe it. It's a totality. But the problem with the whole why it scares people is emptiness will take away everything and give you nothing. And everybody is in the spiritual search to get something for themselves. For example, I happened when I wrote my book, I went looking for exiting the matrix. I did a little search on the internet. What normally comes up? And what was interesting is what came up was ideas. It was always the things like usually related to the material world, like being more in tune with nature, getting rid of your TV or smartphone, having less fear, maybe fixing the government or financial system. There might have been ideas like raising your vibration, loving more, being your best, taking authority over your action. If you notice, it was always something about how the human form could get itself more comfort or something that will move in a direction where there's a happily ever after ending solution. And that gets seen through in a great quote by a gentleman named Gary Harmon, where he said, if you accept that all of this is an illusion, but don't include yourself in that illusion, you have made the classic spiritual mistake.
So if you're saying we are totality, are you saying we are everything or what?
Okay. So, so for everybody watching, even though I do talk about this with my community and local sometimes, this is the first time I'm doing this to a larger audience. So I have to think a little bit in my mind of how I'm going to piece words together for you. So be a bit patient. In my book, I speak 3 different places in the new book about what I call one of the great spiritual misconceptions of our world, and that's around oneness. Almost any mystic who goes, because part of emptiness is no thing, nothing. Part of emptiness is everything. It's the same experience. The void is everything and nothing at the same time. And again, it's one of these, you have to see both. But the problem becomes when the mystic comes back in this world and says, we are all one, meaning that me, including the material body and all of the objects that I am surrounded by, are all one. And that's partially true, but not the way they've come to think. In again, my opinion now, let's call it one of my most recent realizations in this field was that there are actually 2 onenesses. And if we break this down more to look at it through Gnostic or Cathar creation mythology, in their creation understanding, and you will find it in almost all religious traditions or mystical traditions around the world. If you read those creation texts carefully, they're really talking. There's 2 different creations. There's an initial creation, often from what's described as a father, mother type figure, some absolute being. And then there's the creation of our, meaning the thing I've always thought of as me, the realm that we live in, what I'm calling the matrix. That's a separate creation. So there's literally, first of all, there's 2 creations being talked about. Once this matrix was created, at least according to Gnostic and Cathar belief structures, what they call Lucifer, Rex Mundi, Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, whatever word you want to use for the evil creator of this particular realm that we live in, created its beings as a copy. So that's also very interesting. I used to call this, we can get into this too. I used to call this place a simulation, but now I call it a simulacra for specific reasons why I do that. But the demiurge could not get this realm to have life. The realm couldn't live. So it needed to go back to this original creation and either ask for help or trick in a life force into this matrix. That life force was known to the Gnostics as the celestial fire. That celestial fire was, and again, this is the way I'm interpreting the readings of things like the Apocryphon of John or the Gospel of Judas or the many Gnostic Gospels that are explaining their creation mythology. This creative fire, one creative fire enters the matrix and gets trapped, gets seduced, gets tempted, gets trapped, however you might want to answer what that is. In a sense, almost becomes a hostage, and then is broken up into multiple smaller fires, divine sparks. So these divine sparks become the power source within the matrix. All right. So we have a matrix that's been built by the demiurge of everything you can think of, any object, any thought, any idea, any. So that's one. And that is a oneness that exists from the matrix. But there's a second oneness, which would be the divine sparks and to the celestial fire, which would link to this outside realm known as the pleroma in Gnosticism. And there's where the trick comes. When someone says it's all one, which one are they talking about? Because as soon as you include the objects or the people or the things of the matrix, that's not the same one as that which is the celestial fire, which you might call, as you said earlier, the total awareness. And there's the trick. There, and I've been reading like Hezekiah documents. For those who don't know what that is, those are early Christian desert fathers who would go out and live as hermits. Famous names like Saint Anthony, John of the Ladder, many of these who lived out in the Egyptian and Palestinian desert. And they all seem to make the same, as far as I'm concerned, error, that they're including the objects of reality with the totality of what they are, that they're two different things. And that's presented in the mythology by the symbology of water and the symbology of fire. In Cathar terms, the Cathars rejected John as a baptizer because he baptized with water. And they said only Christ could be a legitimate baptizer because he baptizes with fire. And when you begin to recognize that the entire matrix is built on water symbology, water mythology, even in our language, especially English. The English language is built on water language, shipping language, right? We have births, we have friendship, we have relationships, we have. If you go through the language, it's a water-built language. If you watch the Matrix movie, everything about the Matrix was always presented by water, water, water. But the fire is something different. The fire is the power within of what you are. Whenever anyone reaches something really, really deep, they always feel it as warmth, heat. They never feel it as like watery. They feel it as fire. So can you begin to see the tricks that are starting to be played? Because when you read a lot of spiritual terminology in this field, they'll use examples like how we are all one drop in the ocean, and eventually the drop of water returns to the ocean. Yeah, the object from the demiurge returns to the demiurge. What is false? A couple of things I'll try to make clearly. Sorry, I'm kind of going on a bit of a long lecture in this one Jeff's question, but it kind of all fits and it's hard for me to split it up. But what is false can never exit the matrix. Only what is true can exit the matrix. And one tiny bit of false that's still being held on to will not get you through the eye of the needle. And so this water fire discussion that I go through in my book is important to the point that here's one probably no one's ever thought about, and then I'll shut up. That was the story of Christ walking on water. If that's not a metaphor, then to show that he's some divine special creature, but if the water is representing the matrix, it means he's walking on the matrix. He's not sinking in to the deception and the lies of this realm. He's staying in his element of fire and therefore staying in truth. If that's what that metaphor is describing, and even if it wasn't originally, I think that makes it an unbelievably powerful metaphor now to describe what I've just been saying, to think about it in those terms, that if you stay as your divine spark, as your celestial fire, you won't sink into the water of the matrix.
Many people talk about how collectively we are all one, which makes sense to what you're saying, how we were all one divine flame that separated into many flames. Am I saying that correctly?
Right. Well, generally, no. I mean, if someone meant it in those terms, if they meant it that which is beyond all objects, that which is beyond all experiences, that which is beyond anything that we can label or put a name on or have any mental thought for, if that's the one they're referring to, then I would say, yes, they're saying the same thing I am. But as soon as you include the objects of the matrix, which are false, right? The matrix is a false creation at its core. It's in Gnostic terms, it was an error. That's the word they would use in Coptic. They call this realm an error. And so error is not truth. And so as soon as the objects of the world are included as error, error and truth don't go together. And so that's the distinction that I've maybe in the last 6 months come to kind of read. Now I'm digging through a lot of ancient mythology, be it the Mayan Popol Vuh, going back to the Bhagavad Gita, going back to a lot to watch the difference of the water and fire symbol, especially in the Maya. The Maya use a lot of, they have a special symbol known as burning water, which is where they combine the fire and the water. And I want to look more into how they are describing these terms, because I think this is a universal understanding. I don't think it's just something in a few Western mythologies. I think it's worldwide, and I want to study it more going forward to see if even more from other cultures reveal what I'm feeling is correct.
So we are all one only with each other, not with everything.
Well, we are one from the standpoint of the matrix. Like Jeff and Howdie are one from the standpoint of the creation of Lucifer, you might say, who has created this realm for its own purpose, for its own energy production. And it has only one purpose: get the energy from us and make sure we don't figure it out and get out of here. That's it. That's the only purpose this whole thing is built on, nothing else. Yet, what Jeff and I really are, and what everyone else who's out there who has a divine spark, and I don't say everyone you see out there necessarily has a divine spark, but everyone who does have this divine spark at the core of their being, they are also one, but a different one. We're not the Howdie and Jeff one. That's the one that's in the matrix, and Howdie will never get out of the matrix. Howdie will not escape the matrix. Howdie will eventually dissolve itself and burn up just like the matrix does. Eventually, all false will burn, and this will burn too. But the awareness, the divine spark, that will live on. And if you take the divine spark into the metaphor of Sleeping Beauty, that is what that famous story is talking about. Sleeping. Here's again, it's all these little tiny things. When you kind of, if you get the metaphor, I think it opens people's eyes. Howdie is never needed to wake up. Sleeping Beauty is needed to wake up. It's my divine spark that's in a coma. I'm just the vehicle that the divine spark has been needing to go and wake it up. And so the job that the Howdie character has had his whole life is just, how to say this simply, to become the kind of prince that Sleeping Beauty would want to wake up for. Right? The divine spark doesn't want to just be woken by any prince who comes by the castle. She's waiting for a prince who has transformed, has integrity, has honesty, has courage, has clarity. Richard Rose, we can describe this too later, described all this as getting your house in order. That's what she wants. And when the thing that's here can put itself in a place where the divine spark can get woken up again, and life begins to operate from there, not here, that's the only waking up that has to take place. If we put it in terms of the Matrix movie, Neo Anderson in the Matrix, played by Keanu Reeves, right? He doesn't wake up. The Keanu Reeves in the pod, who had all of the wires and things, that's the one that needs to wake up. That's the one that needs to get out of the pod and realize that, oh yeah, the Neo Anderson thing, that was just a projection I was playing. That's the thing that has to wake up. Even that's not really awakening either, but it's just to help the symbolism. That's what's going on here. Is the character we've always been playing has a job to do, but that job is not we have to awaken. I don't have to see how the government works. I don't have to see how this works. I don't have to see if the world is a round ball or a flat earth. That's not actually what has to happen. The thing which is the totality, which is asleep, Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty needs to open her eyes. That's the story of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is providing, when you go into the deep, the actual old stories that were written in the 12 and 1300s. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about how to do that.
You mentioned earlier that what we live in is the simulacrum, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. What's the difference between that and the simulation?
Yeah. So a simulation, I'll see if I can find the exact terminology here so I can get it for you, because I want to, if I say it correctly, I should be able to remember off the top of my head. But simulation is something that is created, we'll simplify. It's something that's created to obtain data or to run an experiment on. There's a specific purpose for its creation, and it's usually data related. And while this realm could be an experience or it could be an experiment, I move more to the word simulacra. And simulacra more means it's a copy of something else. It's a type of simulation. I wish I could find the exact. Since it's in the first chapter of my book, I'll just look through it here so I can get the exact wording on it for you, so I don't. I'd hate to have people not. Anyway, the point being, it's a copy of. And what's really interesting when I looked at the word simulacra, is that the idea that it's a copy. It's the simulacra is a copy of an original, unless the original no longer exists. Then the simulacra becomes the original. So if you think about it in terms like, if I have a piece of paper and I put it in the photocopier and I make a copy, as long as the original copy exists, the copy I just made is a copy. But if I then destroy the original, well, the copy would be the original. And so because of the way that term is structured, I think it offers more understanding as to where we are, because it's telling us we're a copy of something else, but that doesn't even necessarily guarantee that the original we were copied from exists. And this leads into way back to my work of the World Fairs and the idea of countless resets and restarts of this realm, where literally the reality gets to a certain point, which I think we're at now. I think we're at the same point again. I talk about that in chapter 6 of my book, which I talk about the origins and endings of this simulacra. And each time the new simulation or the new simulacra is built on the old one. But I don't think the old one continues. The old one, we're copied from it, but it's not like it goes from it. Which makes sense. If you were building a computer program, a computer video game, and you had the opportunity to use somebody else's video game for half of your coding, well, of course you would do that. It saves you a lot of time. And I think that's kind of how this, I'm symbolizing, but so I think that's kind of what we're dealing with. That's why I use the word simulacra now and try to stop using simulation, because it makes it kind of puts the idea of it's here for an experiment. And then you, by using the term, you have to say, well, what is the experiment for? And if there is no use, if there is no experiment, then the word doesn't really apply.
Do you think that the ancient structures around the world, like the pyramids and others, are something that's been copied from before, and that's why we can't figure out how they were built?
Right. Right. They're literally were built maybe two or three um, simulacras ago, two or three resets before, maybe more. And so how they were built, how they worked, how they function could only be understood from we'll call it the building blocks of that particular time. Each simulacra changes I might say, the rules of the game, right? So with our rules, we can't figure it out in their rules. We can only tell it's something magnificent. It's there's still a very powerful energy that's there. They generate experiences, but if they weren't built in our realm, we would have almost no chance to understand them. Similar to how would a character in Westworld, whose whole life story is backstory, right? They never really were born. They never really were a child. They never really did things with their parents. They never, all that is just implanted story. So what if the majority of what we call history, is just that? It's a giant backstory to make us think we've been living in a reality that's thousands, millions of years old, but might only be 100, 50, 200 years old. That all the rest of it is just a story, and we may have no possibility of ever understanding it because our current realm was started after those. But they were true in they're not just completely fake. They're a copy of that which was true in another time. And I think my feeling is, from having been at all of these sites all over the world, is that they were part of the way people exited the matrix then. Um, it may be the reason that that particular reality was stopped and a new one was started, because maybe too many divine sparks were getting out by things like the pyramids, and they had to change the demiurge had to change the rules a little bit, so that couldn't happen. We can still sense there's something magnificent here, but that last bit of tool is no longer um, totally accessible to us. Just a possibility, because my exit the cave journey and my emptiness journey started in the Great Pyramid. My first true experience of emptiness was there. So I don't want to totally say that they still don't have their power, but it would explain a lot of our non-understanding of these sites.
One of my guests spoke about something, and there is also a book about what I'm about to tell you, and that is that the Earth is a prison planet on the edge of the galaxy. And most of the people here are, the bad of the galaxy, as well as the geniuses that are the troublemakers. Have you ever considered that?
Well, it gets into a bit of it gets into a bit of the challenging areas when you start trying to define the reality itself after a point when you've seen that it's all a projection. This becomes very difficult, because if I show you a if I show you a movie on a wall, we'll use the Plato's cave analogy a little bit. If I show you a movie on the wall and ask you to tell me what happened, and it's a movie. It's not like I've taken video footage of my life or something. It's literally, I'm showing you like any movie on it. And I ask you, well, tell me how these characters' lives went and what happened to them. And well, you could say, well, it's just a movie. I mean, literally, these are actors on the screen, just they're fulfilling roles. And once this movie was over, they went home and they lived their actor life. So I don't know what happened to these characters. They don't exist. Ah, So we wind up with this kind of problem with how deeply can we go into the study of the matrix itself. That doesn't mean that your idea isn't a possibility. That um, there's a great quote that if you're really looking for liberation, right? It's a quote from Albert Camus, and it was something to the lines of like, when you learn to live in an unfree world, um, choosing to be completely free is the greatest act of rebellion you can have. And so it would make sense when divine sparks begin to exhibit um, disobedience to the attempted soul constructs of the prison reality, that the demiurge would try to find ways to put the troublemakers together. That is so I can't say that it would be an incorrect idea at all, but eventually you come to that wall and you say, but does it actually matter if you figure that out or not? Because it's still just a story in the matrix, another another deceptive game that Lucifer is playing on everyone. It's reality has to you have to see it like a set of Russian nesting dolls. Every time you think you've got a layer of the deception figure out, you open it up and there's another doll inside. You open it up, there's another doll inside. In Zen, when they asked in a famous story in Zen, and the student asked its teacher, "Can you describe the universe?" "Oh, it's a turtle on top of another turtle." "Okay, well, what's that turtle on?" "Well, it's on another turtle." "Well, what's it?" You don't get it. It's just turtles all the way down. And so whether it's turtles or um, dolls, it's one of the biggest. This this realm is suffering on one side, it's distraction on the other. This realm wants you to be focused on anything. It doesn't matter what you get focused on, as long as you emotion, and that's emotionally, that's the word, emotionally invest in it. In a sense, the matrix has you. So that doesn't mean you ignore this reality, or you ignore experience, or you ignore the challenges and suffering that you and other beings are having. But it means begin to start as you get closer and closer to emptiness, you begin to, let's call it, apply less emotional energy to the way you interact with the world and become more of I call it like an empathetic observer. That's one thing that the great philosopher, I think Schopenhauer, had as a really valuable tool, which was, once you realize you live in a world of suffering, one of your great responses to it is to respond with empathy to everyone and everything you come across, because everyone else is suffering too. And I think that's another helpful way, short term, of navigating something that we don't fully understand.
Have you figured a way out?
How to say this without um, it's through the realization of emptiness. And that I know there's a lot of people speaking about this subject now. You and I spoke about this before we got started, how 5 years ago, really, like Wayne Bush over at trickedbythelight.com was one of the few people talking about this subject openly. And all of a sudden, in the last 5 years or so, it's just kind of exploded, this concept. And I think the period of 2020 to 2024, the insanity that the world went through, really pushed a lot of people to have to say, hey, this place isn't anything like I thought it was. This place is, it's more insane than I could ever imagine. And these ideas began to, there was a more receptive audience for people to ask questions like, you know what, this stuff, like, if I talked about this 20 years ago, I'd be ignored. I would be totally ignored. But talking about it now, a lot of people can say, based on the experiences of their own life and just watching the last few years, to say, this place is a nuthouse theater. So who's to say it isn't one giant trapping projection? That a lot of people now can say that's possible. The challenge becomes is usually, as again, we go back to how do you exit the matrix? It always becomes about the matrix. It always comes about not exiting as in leaving. It's about disengaging from the reality the way it is and re-engaging with reality in somehow more, in a more complete, in a more happy, in a more loving, in a more joyful way, as opposed to, I would consider exiting the cave to be exiting, gone. And that takes us back to the statement of only that which is true will exit, that which is false will not. So if you're asking what's the methodology for the exit, it would be drop all false. When you have dropped everything that can be dropped and get to the last thing, and you try to drop it, you try your best to say, how is this false? And you realize, holy smokes, I can't drop it. It must be true. You're almost there. And to add on top of that, which is kind of, I guess it's interesting. Someone asked me also a few weeks ago, like, why are you even doing this? Why are you writing these books? Why are you doing these talks? And I realized, I guess it's because there's been a huge segment of the world's population that's never had a voice. They've been told to believe for hundreds of years that God is love and you should be grateful for the life you've been given and it's all wonderful and it's a school of learning, but they didn't feel that way and they had no voice. And I guess I'm kind of doing this now just as a voice for this segment of the world's population who's come to see our reality completely different. And in that difference of seeing, our reality differently is the sense that this realm will never get better. It will never improve. This again is a huge seeing. As soon as someone usually sees that there's something wrong with reality, that it's insane, the natural tendency is, how do I fix it? How do I make it better? And people will spend 20, 30 years of their lives. It never gets better. Think of how many prayers have been sent to God, how many trillions of prayers for world peace, for kindness, for people to treat each other wonderfully over how many thousands of years have existed. This place is getting worse every year. And I think it's because it's been built that way. It's been built to be a garbage dump. So actually, the reality is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And we are the ones who are in error, as I did it too. I tried to go out and fix the world and make it better. But we're trying to make a video game about cars into a video game about golf. It's not, it hasn't been structured to do that. And once that energy gets, okay, I don't need to go and in fact, I can't fix the world, but I can transform the thing here. And I can maybe transform a few other people and a few bits of my personal environment. And if the energy is put into the right direction, it can have tremendous. The divine spark has more power than the entire matrix. You made this comment about, oh, maybe this is a type of planet for all of the problem people of well, at your core, you are more powerful than the demiurge, and the demiurge knows it. The demiurge knows that any divine spark who totally comes into all of their own power is dangerous to this reality. And this reality is trying to do everything it can to get you to not get into that power. The problem is, as soon as you decide, I'm going to fix it, you start draining your power. You start losing it. As soon as you decide to settle into that space and just accept that and see what other sparks you might be able to pass on some fire to, pass on some light to. I hate to use that word, but use it that way. Then something really great has happened. It's small little things that have a huge impact, but the reality wants you to try to have huge impacts so that it can get you bogged down and back into its weird system of energy control.
So if we try to create the exit strategy into something practical, part of it would be to accept this realm for what it is, not try to change it, right?
That'd be one, yes.
And then what else can you add to that?
Well, there's two parts, which again, like I say, now empty the cave is going, because exit the cave was about, I think, presenting an idea that the world isn't a world of love. And that's kind of where I had to start. I had to start at that place. I had to kind of give people a shake to see, okay, who might say that they agree with that thesis? And I say, okay, let's move on to the thesis. And the next part of the thesis is um, definition. So it's digging into and defining what the reality is, what the matrix is, and self-defining who and what the thing is here. What is this thing? What actually is it? If you strip away all the beliefs and ideas and start from scratch, what is it? And I can share some ideas from Falling for Truth, like how that worked in my world. But the first foundation is known as, and Richard Rose, one of the great teachers that existed in our most recent time. He died in 2005, I think. He talked about one of the key foundations of work was what he called getting your house in order. And it's very mundane, practical things that most spiritual seekers don't want to do because it doesn't sound spiritual enough. They want to can I sit in meditation for 12 hours today? I don't want to, have to have a talk with my kids, or I don't want to have to, do something at work, or I don't want to have to, these very mundane things. But getting your house in order means to get eventually a clear, balanced mind. That's really the house that has to be getting into order, because a distorted mind is going to give you problems as you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the examination of reality. But we start that by getting our physical self in order. I'm saying, yeah, okay, you're saying physical self is an illusion, it's a projection, but you're using the projection. Just like I wouldn't say I'm the car that I drive, but I sure want to make sure that the car is functioning, and then if it needs an oil change, you give it an oil change. You change the tires if it's flat. You need to look after the physical thing so that energetically it has the energy available it needs for the work you want it to do. So unfortunately, if for example, if you're ill, then that takes up a lot of energy. I know I had a 10-year illness, and during the 10-year illness, there were a lot of things spiritually I couldn't do. That was my spiritual work. The working on the illness to get yourself to better and better stages, that's part of getting your house in order. Maybe physically you're just not healthy. You're just not living well. You're overweight. You're smoking. You're drinking. You're watching video games all day. These are ways of getting your house in order so that you are saying, what is my core intent? What is the most important thing I'm doing with my life? And I'm going to start moving my life in such a way so that I can have a space that is functional and works well. Because eventually it's to start working on the mind, to start recognizing if you have a fragmented mind, or you have a mind that's gone through trauma and is not, I don't want to call it healed, that's not the word, transformed from it, then it's going to be a challenge, because have a realization of emptiness, the egoic mind can't go there. But one of the great actual gifts of the egoic mind is if the egoic mind is fractured, if it's not whole, it will not let you go through. So many people, they get to the how it literally comes a possibility of walking into emptiness, but the egoic mind says, I'm still shattered with trauma. You're not going anywhere. So the working on these things, which again, they seem mundane. I don't want to have to work on this trauma. I don't want to have to work on this problem I had with my parents. I don't want to have to, but you do, because the more clear and calm your mind becomes, the more it's able to let go of its throne, you might say. A healed mind, when it comes into reaching to seeing its totality, will say, okay, I can let go. So that's part of getting your house in order. It may take time to do that, and that's okay. But that's a part of the process that is, things that seem mundane are very powerful. Those are things like the life recapitulation, to have gone through and seen your life clearly. Um, Different things that are called like the inventory, which are called opposite work, which are called testing reality. I talk about those things in there. Those are ways to define going within. And this is a really interesting phrase, and I'll let Jeff ask the next question, which is a great change will happen in your work of observation when someone says going within, the first thought people think of is, oh, right, I have to tune out the world and I'm going to look at my thoughts and I'm going to look at my feelings and that's part of going within. But real going within is the recognition of what that term means is going into the self, the thing which can observe that which is observing the thought. So it's not going within a body. When you find out the body is still outside of this much greater self, that's what it means, is to go so far back into what you are that even what you had believed you were is still another thing outside of this external self. That's the work of what's classified as going within, and it's very challenging work.
In the space of emptiness, is all the information of the universe there? Because I think some meditators will talk about that if they can get to that space during meditation, that they can access it in some way.
That could be a word. Yeah, that could be a word that could be used for it, which is another word I've heard used for it is the unmanifested mind. So it's the place where objects originate as thoughts. So it's literally before even objects. It's literally at the even thought the manifested object. And it would be a connection space with the whole reality. Again, one of the many tricks that get played is we talk about in normal spiritual terms, that word gets thrown around, the Akashic records, right? This place of the totality of everything, which definitely exists, but it's always presented as a wonderful thing. Oh, I can get to the Akashic records and I can know everything. Well, when you think of the Akashic records, it's data collection. And what government data collection service is doing that for your benefit? There is not one. The data collection is for their benefit, and any access you get to it is what they kind of allow you to access. And that's kind of the way the Akashic records work. It's it's like a giant data bank where the universe can know everything about you, and when needed, will know what trick it needs to play on you. It's the second chapter of my book is all about the television show The Good Place, um, and how our reality, our matrix, is structured exactly the same, and that we are basically the universe knows everything about us. It knows every single way it can tempt us and get us to fear, get us to do everything, and we have no idea how manipulated our day-to-day lives have been. That to me was also shocking when I really dug into my life and realized these were not random occurrences, or these traumas were not by accident. They've literally been scripted into my life. And that helped me a lot to realize that this thing. And I hope that if you read the book and you go through some of this stuff, you guys start to realize that a lot of the traumas in your life, they're not your fault. They're not there because you're a bad person or you've had terrible karma. You don't deserve suffering. They were literally scripted into your life before you were even born. What a sick world this is. So why would we want any more of it? And I just I don't. And so my whole the work has been to figure out, like you just said, well, how do you end the reincarnation cycle for good and not have to do this anymore? And so I'm hoping what I'm sharing is kind of my journey that's useful for someone else's journey.
Let's say you exit the reincarnation cycle. What next?
I have no idea, but the sense would be that any individual experience that would of course not be there. It's one of the big holes as to why why so few, I think, cross into a full realization of emptiness, because they know, you don't get to take your character with you. The character gets left behind. And um, it's it's hard because this is who we've known our life. I've got to know this particular person in front of me my whole life. Even I thought I did. I've had to relearn this person year after year after year. Um, but this is who we've always thought we have been for a long period of time. I'm not sure if I told this story. I think I told this story in our first conversation, but it's a good place to tell again. When I was watching a young child, friend of mine, young girl, she was about 2 years old, and when she wanted something, she described it as Molly wants a drink. She would never say, I want a drink. She'd say, Molly wants a drink. She was interacting with the parent as if the Molly thing and the thing that we're speaking were two different things. And of course, the parents would say, no, no, no. You say, I want a drink. Say, no, Molly wants a drink. And as I was watching this, I was saying, wow, at some point when we were unbelievably young, we knew at a core, we were not this. We knew this is like a character that that this awareness is using, and the world around us over time, like eventually this girl would have been broken down, and eventually she would get to the point and say, I want a drink. Molly and I are now the same thing. When before, whatever this I was not Molly. It was something deeper, but was connected to, had this idea of Molly is my vehicle. It was an amazing thing for me to witness and realize, there it is. So it's at our core. Like none of this is actually frightening or scary. I know some people hear the ideas of emptiness, whether they hear it from here, a Buddhist or an Advaita or whatnot, and it sounds scary, but it's only scary to this thing because this is the thing that has come to believe its importance. And just like with young little Molly, Molly was operating from this place that's not Molly. That is, and it's still. When these Asian traditions or the Hezekians in Christian tradition, when they talk about stillness, they don't mean quiet. They don't mean a place of like no noise. They mean the place of your totality, that you're resting in what you are, which is still. So therefore, you can be still even in a world of extreme noise, even in a world of extreme movement. In Asian texts like the Ashtavakra Gita, they'll talk about how you're moving without moving, or you're operating in stillness even when there's activity around you, that it doesn't matter whether there's activity or no activity, it's still. That's kind of what all of this is discussing, is this, because the still point is not part of the matrix. The still point is this element that was part of this fire that was brought in here and what we are. So when this ends, which will be soon for me, I'll see what it's like to be fire again.
One of your chapters is titled Time Loops. What is that about?
Ah, interesting. That's one of my additional chapters at the additional material at the end. Actually, I had about 200 pages of additional material and it just couldn't go in the book. So I actually got to post some of it on my internet site because the book would be 500 pages. I brought that up and decided to include it because I had been working with time loops for a long time, maybe about 20 or 25 years ago. Um, there was a few people who were writing about it at that time. Even David Icke, you had him recently. He had talked about it in one of his early books, 25 years ago. And I began to notice again, when I was testing my reality and I was testing my experience, I noticed that things would be looping, that there would be a car would drive by and then literally 4 seconds later, the same car would drive by, which is impossible. There's no way the car could. And I realized that there's all of these glitches and loops and things built into our reality. So I was watching the possibility of loops. And the first set of loops that's interesting is even the idea of reincarnation is normally presented as multiple lives over a linear series of time. But a great book, a novel known as Replay by Ken Grimwood, came out in 1986. It claimed that reincarnation was living your life, dying, coming back, living your life, dying, living your that literally you are going to live the same life in the same body in similar circumstances over and over and over and over again. And this is really the reincarnation cycle that's broken, not necessarily multiple lives. Or again, if you add it even bigger, what if you've got 100 lives, but each of those 100 lives will have 10,000 loops in it? And again, through some experiences, I watched myself die in a parallel reality or a looping reality. I tracked other lives that I've been living in this body, which are different to this one, but totally plausible. So I began to realize that that's a likely possibility. Now, I needed to say that as a background, time loops in general. But what I brought into this book is about the endings. And the ending of our I'll call it simulation for now, which is coming up soon, was discussed also by a gentleman named John Pennella. And he wrote a number of books. They were called Earth Chronicles, Time Loop Chronicles series, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Quite a lot of sort of Christian biblical ideas, but that I didn't fully connect with. But his time loop idea I did. And what that chapter is about is he suggested that there's a 1,000 year time loop that we're trapped in, that he describes it as actually 1,000 years, that you do live multiple lives, and that his date was 2027. In 2027 is when this loop ends, and we go back to, I think it was 952 or something, right? It was 1,000 years, or 1,080 years. It was half a processional age. Much. So this chapter was just for fun. I started using his numbers, his date, because that's all he gave for information about it. So I started breaking down the numbers, breaking down the dates. And if I used 2030 and I started having that, quartering that, the dates I bumped into were like Christopher Columbus landing in the United States, 1492, landed on the Cathars. I was literally landing, all of those events were like major historical markers. And that's why I included it, because I had to say, maybe that's a clue as to the controlled falseness of our reality, is that we have a bizarrely scripted 1,000 year loop that we're going through. And that it's so strange now because we're coming to the end of it. And it's it's important to be prepared for that possibility, that maybe that really is true, that this reality we've been living in is about coming to an. I've said that they're building. I'm calling it a simulation for now, a simulacra. They're building a new one. And I think it's already built. I think it's ready to go. It's what is being presented as the 5D ascension, right? This new wonderful age, this new golden age. On the other side will be a new technological wonder, this place where you are hooked into the mainframe. It's the problem for me is D in my world doesn't mean dimension, it means depth. So you go from 3D to 4D to 5D, you're going deeper into quicksand. You're going deeper into the matrix. As opposed to me, you'd want to be moving to 1D, to oneness, moving your way out, not 5 levels deep. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of tricks being played to convince people that this new, wonderful presented reality will answer all of your questions, answer all of your fears, will be safe, wonderful, and again, it's another level in the projection, another doll inside a doll. It's all there to trick you.
Well, by your calculations, when is the next major event?
Well, by my calculations, it's like we are in a point where we are literally, like I say, I started with 1080, so I went back, 540 and then 270 and then literally we're in like the 2 year period. If I go to the last, like literally we're near the end. The end, the literal end of this is the next one was 2024, which is where we are. So the next date would be 2 years later, which is 2026. Then we're down to having that, which is 2027, and there's no more after that.
Hmm.
So according to the way I did these numbers, 2027 is when there is no more.
At one point, you were having difficulty with reality, and you mentioned that you would even hold on to the chair to make sure it was real. How did you work yourself out of that?
Well, I worked out of that. Again, I'm sure I told the experience last time, but I'll tell it again for all the new people. But right around that time, I was doing 12 hours a day of exercise. Like I was obsessive with the various things that I was doing. I was a stand-up comedian at the time, so I really only had to work on the weekends, and I had the rest of my work free to just rest of my week free to just do exercises on myself, like a giant alchemy experiment. And like I say, that particularly the native teachers I was with, they wanted me testing reality. And I'd gotten to the point where I was at my girlfriend's house, and I just we were watching TV, and I just said, "Oh, your sister's coming over." What do you mean? And all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. She opens the door, lets her sister in. Said, how did you know my sister was here? Well, she drove up, she parked right out front there in the car, and then she walked in. Like, howdy, that's a wall. And it's only when she said it that the wall reformed. I had literally been looking directly outside without a wall there. I was literally just watching the world. So this had become my normal reality from how I had been testing the world. And I'll admit it got a little, it did get a bit scary because I didn't know how to turn it off now. Like I was getting my answer. Like I wanted to know how real is reality. And now I got my answer. And like, well, this is not helpful. So like this is beyond useful. And I called my Korean monk. And of course, he doesn't speak English. So we had to talk to somebody and have them translate back for me. And he just said, yeah, he thinks you're going a bit crazy, but he thinks he thinks it's quite funny. Just go play. He told you go play golf for a few days. Okay, so I did. I went and played golf for like 2 days straight. I just played like 48 holes a day, and after 2 or 3 days, reality got solid again, and it was to the point where I knew if I just made a shift, if I wanted to make this shift now, then I could see reality in a different way. Where it's like you could get to the point in that movie, The 13th Floor, where when that guy took the drive in the car and saw the end of the world. But I realized I don't have to do that anymore. I've learned what I need to learn from this, so it's okay his message was reground back into the world and become a character, become a proper character in reality. And that's something that can be so challenging when somebody gets one of these realizations. It's easy to start almost like floating away. Partially, it's so freeing. Like it's so some of these are so they're so freeing to the thing you've always known, which has been so heavy, and especially if there's a feeling where you've released your pain and released your suffering in it. Of course, you feel fantastic, but you realize I've got a role to play in this story, in this world movie, and I have to keep playing my role. And if I'm not grounded and able to function, then I can't play that role. And one of the roles, for whatever reason, coming out of my experience has been to do things like this, to write these books and have these conversations. And what I hope is a sharing these ideas in a very grounded, very clear and honest presentation, which I think is really helpful because it shows that you can still have these kinds of very deep experiences and yet still totally be able to function here. You don't have to wind up living on a park bench or muttering to yourself or pushing a shopping cart. You can, but I was lucky that I had a very fine teacher at the time who knew what to say, said it, and at least I was smart enough to do it.
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Well, now I've kind of got to the point where I kind of want to let the community. I have a community over at Locals, and if you go to Howdie Mickoski, I've go to locals.com and find Howdie Mickoski. I would rather have people talk within the community with each other as a first step. I go in and I sometimes, engage with the community as well, but I would prefer people could go there because it's an opportunity to talk with other people who are often in the same level or going through the exact same experience. And I think that's a really great thing to have somebody else that you can share where you're at, what you're seeing, what you're going through, um, rather than necessarily, you know, throw questions out to me. I'm about ready to take the next stage of the work, which is going to be a long period of stillness. I'm going to take the equivalent of a long retreat, not a vacation. It'll be sitting. So I won't be too accessible during that time because I'm going to do the next science experiment, which is okay. These Hezekians and these hermits, they went out to live 20, 30 years in the forest alone. I'm not going to go live for 30 years alone, but I'm going to go live long enough to kind of just say, does this have any real value or not? I want to come back with, yes, it has value, and here's why, or actually, no, it really doesn't have value. You can do all the same things while totally functioning in the world. So please come to my locals community. It's a great group of people, and there that would be the place to go to have deep discussions on where you are with other people having the same experiences.
I don't think that I knew that you used to be a stand-up comedian. And it would be pretty interesting to see if you made jokes about all this stuff.
What was strange, Jeff, and again, interesting, all these things I talk about in the new book, which was right before I had my experience of emptiness, when I fell in that canyon, 3 weeks before, I'd made the decision to stop being a comedian. I've been a comedian for 12 years. And I know most people who are watching this now or who know me can't fathom that. They can't, how could you be funny? But when I fell and had the experience of emptiness in the canyon, I came out with most of what went in. The ability to be a comedian was gone because that had been my identity for a long, long time. It's how I associated with people. I liked, right? I liked to go to a party and tell people I'm a comedian, and all of a sudden you get all sorts of attention. And once my experience of emptiness happened, I even tried it once. I went on stage and nothing. The audience just sat there in like stunned silence. And I realized I'm not one anymore. I don't have that ability. And it's like that took a while to realize that identity's gone. It doesn't exist anymore here. And so it was a valuable tool. It was valuable for observing reality because that is what a comedian does. A comedian is looking at the world just like everyone else. They're just noticing something. Someone notices something strange and they forget about it. The comedian writes it down in a notebook and then finds a way to talk about it. And so it's partially being a comedian is working on defining reality and defining yourself and seeing people really well. But the actual ability to be humorous kind of doesn't exist much anymore, I'm afraid. And yeah, Jeff, I tried.
Well, if people want to find out more about your new book, do they go to a website or Amazon?
Either, although right now I don't know when we're going to have this posted, but like for example, Amazon doesn't have the cover showing. You can purchase the book. The ebook isn't there yet. It's only been out a couple of weeks, and it sometimes takes a while for the the print version and the ebook version to go to all the different places you like to go. But to get information, easiest place, we go to my website. There's a page there for Empty the Cave, and it has the sample chapters. You can read the first chapter. I also read the first chapter on my YouTube channel, so you can also hear the first chapter read to you. And yeah, if it's a book that's interesting to you, then just be patient. And wherever you normally like to buy your books from, eventually it'll show up there in a week or something, and you can go that route. And I hope this will be a really unique conversation starter now, because like you say, this subject has been talked about for the last few years in a lot of places. It's starting to grow. And I think this book is a very different message than is normally presented. So my hope is that this will provide even more conversation going forward with other people who are, whether they agree or disagree with it, but just to generate more conversation around the subject.
Howdie, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Sure. If anything, I think everything is positive that I said. It may not sound that way, but the best message to remember is that which you are has more power over everything that's false. And since the matrix is false, even the creator of the matrix is false. It means the power within is greater than all of that. And even the creator of this reality is actually afraid of you. That's powerful.
Howdie, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thanks again, Jeff, for not only having me on, but for the work you're doing and giving people a voice to come and share their experiences. It's valuable for everyone. Thanks, man.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.